Hi, thank you for joining us today at the State Room. My name is Scot Mussi. I'm president of the Arizona Free Enterprise Club. Joining us today is Aimee Yentes, also with the Free Enterprise Club, president of our vice president of our policy, heads up all of our advocacy work and research and policy work here in the state of Arizona. Thank you, Aimee, for coming together, wanting to do this podcast.
Yeah, this is fun, Scott. This is fun.
So just for clarification on what we're doing here, several months ago, we decided it probably was time that we launched our own podcast, something where from a political and policy direction, we're doing all this activity here in the state and thought that it would be good that we're able to provide kind of an inside look on how we engage here on the state. Every major fight, every major political battle, our organization's often in the middle of it. And we obviously do a lot of work where we go out and talk at the legislature. We'll look to do various Zoom calls or online calls, but we thought it was time that we needed to have an opportunity where we can sit down and really give the inside look on how we're making a difference here in the state, whether it be on policy issues, talk with candidates looking to run for office, and from that, the State Room was born. So today, I wanted to begin the State Room talking about a couple of the key issues we're working on at the legislature here. Aimee's engaged in down there on a day-to-day basis, fighting the good fight. And wanted to start off first talking about probably the biggest issue we're currently fighting at the legislature right now. In fact, it's the biggest issue probably going to impacting Arizonans and Arizona taxpayers is this fight over conformity and tax conformity, something that probably nobody has ever heard of before, because it's not something that is a kitchen room term. It's something that is usually just kind of an inside baseball fight at the legislature, but has become a big fight this year at the legislature. And so, Aimee, do you want to take a couple minutes, explain what is conformity? When we talk about this, what is tax conformity? Why should anybody care about this? And secondarily, why has this now become a problem and an issue for Katie Hobbs, and frankly, a crisis that she has created?
Yeah, and of course, this is actually an issue that kind of comes up every year at the legislature, but most years it's just kind of a procedural matter. It's boring. And that's because this issue of what's Arizona conforming its tax codes has to do with what they do at the federal level. And so for most years, that's not much. The changes that the federal government makes on taxes are pretty minute, and so there's not a lot that the state has to do as far as tax policy goes. And so, really, this started with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill that occurred on July 4th, so Independence Day. And that included many of the major tax policy provisions that President Trump was running on. Things like, not taxing tips or not taxing overtime, which were obviously very popular. And so when those major tax changes happen at the federal government, then states like Arizona have to make conforming changes so that Arizonans can both, streamline and do their taxes, but also take advantage of major tax cuts that are happening at the federal level. So
if we want the Trump tax cuts that happened at the federal level, conformity is how we get the Trump tax cuts at the state level.
Exactly right. So all the good provisions, whether that's on the individual side like that or for small businesses and corporations, we have to adopt a mirror piggyback on those federal provisions in order for Arizona filers to take advantages of those. And so
if we didn't conform, what would happen? If we just said we're not doing anything, what would happen?
Those provisions, that would be a tax decrease for whatever those relevant ones are for taxpayers. They wouldn't be able to realize the full benefits of those tax cuts. So they'd be paying more, essentially. And this got scored for Arizona for this year about $440 million. So that's just this tax season that people are facing now it's what we're rounding out the middle of March. So I'm sure everybody's collecting their documents and sending them over to their CPAs, getting ready to file their taxes. And so, many states saw this and they went into special session of their legislature. They knew they had to convene their legislative body to pass a tax bill to get sent to their governor to become tax law, to conform with those federal changes. And so that didn't happen in Arizona's case. And so despite, actually there were a lot of Republicans who kind of behind the scenes, you probably didn't hear or see a lot of that. They were lobbying. They were saying, we've got to get on this. Governor, please, convene us into special session so that we can deal with this as a matter of urgency, so that come January, when people start to get their W-2s, people start to think about filing their taxes, that they would have certainty and they would know what that looked like.
Let's not sugarcoat this, Aimee. Governor Katie Hobbs has completely bungled this. And this isn't the first time she's bungled something. She's been bungling things for a few years now as governor, but she's bungled this entire conformity issue. I mean, she could have, as you described it, called a special session, brought everybody back in December, and made sure everybody had tax clarity before tax season even began. She chose not to. Instead, she rolled into January and then at the State of the State address and announced that she wanted her own conformity plan. She had put out statements prior to that on social media, but announced at her State of the State that she gave in January that she wanted her own conformity plan. Well, what was that? Like, what did she want to do on her own conformity plan that she was trying to proclaim as her own tax cut package?
Yeah, exactly. In November, she kind of rolled out what she, I guess, called her own middle-class tax cuts, which really only amounted to about half of the full federal benefit for Arizona taxpayers. And so she borrowed some of the more popular headlines, the things like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and tried to come up with her own plan. And then she asked her Department of Revenue, they're an executive agency, so they take direction from Katie Hobbs, and asked the Department of Revenue to promulgate forms that would conform to her tax plan. But as you said, it wasn't full conformity to the one big beautiful bill. It was only about $220 million benefit to Arizonans instead of that $440 million in this first year. And so what proceeded from there is really what has thrown the entire situation into complete chaos, which was Department of Revenue did take her package, but then they also adopted tax forms that assumed conformity to every provision of the one big beautiful bill.
Wait, so let me get this straight. She announced her own plan, but then her own Department of Revenue issued tax forms that didn't even align with what she wanted to do. They did full conformity, which is what every Republican, what our organization wanted. We wanted at least full conformity tax relief. If you're going to do tax relief and you're going to give the amount, you wanted the full amount. The tax forms reflected what most Republicans, as far as amount, were advocating for and didn't even reflect what she wanted.
Exactly right. I guess to their credit, they did adopt what she wanted, and then everything else that the Republicans wanted on top of it. So that first hearing, when Republicans were trying to pass an actual bill that adopted sort of the Arizona full conformity plan, they testified in committee, and I would just love to have been a fly on the wall. I shocked to see maybe that heads didn't roll after that, other than they need competent people running these agencies, and especially in the middle of tax filing season. But they made it clear that, not basically conforming fully and doing something that was contradictory to the tax forms that they put out would likely result in 1 million Arizonans having to refile their taxes. So, I mean, as far as this would be unprecedented. This is kind of catastrophic in a sense.
So Katie Hobbs didn't call a special session, then pushed back when the idea of saying we're going to provide full conformity tax relief, said she's opposed to that, announced her own plan, but then her own Department of Revenue issued the forms that do full conformity, and she's now trying to figure out a way to roll that back so that taxpayers don't get full conformity. So not only because we're in the middle of tax filing season, people are filing their taxes. People would now have to go in and refile their taxes if we change the forms, I assume?
Exactly right. And that's why the Republicans have actually sent 2 iterations of a full conformity package with some, minute changes to the specific policies, but the full amount. And they put 2 different versions of this on Katie Hobbs' desk. And unfortunately, she's vetoed both of them.
Yeah. And that's why we're going and trying to explain this to everybody, that what Katie Hobbs wants to do is complete chaos. It would cause chaos in our tax system. As you mentioned, 1 million people would probably have to refile their taxes and pay more when they do it, because her plan rolls back tax relief.
Yeah, and it was kind of funny because in some of the committee hearings, and they had a joint one between the House and the Senate for their, tax, Ways and Means, Finance committees. And some of the Democrats on the committee were just kind of, I guess, say maybe the shrugging a little bit, like maybe it's not that big of a deal that, taxpayers have to come back and, pay additional money to CPAs and accountants to refile. Everybody, most people probably rather have a root canal than file their taxes. So the idea that we're going to, now have to go do it twice and pay more money, pay more taxes on top of it is...
Any politician that's telling taxpayers that it's no big deal that you have to go and file your taxes twice are completely out of touch and don't understand anything that goes into tax preparation, what people have to deal with. That is just an insane position.
They might be unfamiliar with filing taxes, Scott.
Probably. Maybe they think they just represent constituents that just don't pay any taxes.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe that probably is a large portion of their constituents. Who knows? But so that's where we're at. Right now, they're in the middle of this fight. She's saying, where do we go from here? I mean, what is the best, if we're going to make sure that we don't have what chaos Katie wants and people having to file tax returns, what is the best thing that Republicans, that the legislature can do to prevent any of that kind of damage from happening for taxpayers in Arizona?
Well, I guess I'll start by just saying that Republicans don't actually have to do anything. And the onus really is on Katie Hobbs. The reality is people are filing under these forms. And so, they don't have to pass any tax bill. This is the situation. So,
So simply take the position that we're not going to support anything that involves people having to file their taxes again. So that means we keep the tax forms that her office approved and do a budget based on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd probably be a good idea if they wanted to, middle of April on tax filing day, send another bill up to her desk and give her one last opportunity to make this right and give people certainty. But, I don't know how this. It's not very difficult calculus to do, Scott. Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes if I'm putting myself in Katie Hobbs, mindset, and I'm thinking a few months down the road, like how do you square this? It just doesn't make any sense.
I just look at it from her perspective. She's bungled it. She's kind of drove herself into her own box canyon because she's taken a position that's untenable. The last thing the Republicans should be doing is looking to give her some sort of bailout, trying to figure out a way to some sort of soft landing, even if setting aside changing the forms, but anything else that gives her some, because nothing should be tied to this. These are the forms. Do a budget based on that. Call it a day. Am I missing something there?
Nope. For this year, at least, assuming the full conformity amount, that just makes sense. Like I don't see a reality in which they escape from that. And then go back to taxpayers and say, yeah, go refile, and oh, by the way, you owe us more money. Like in the middle of election season, so. It's, I'm not sure who's consulting Katie Hobbs these days, but I would strongly advise against that.
Chaos Katie struck again. She's bungled this. Republicans should not be bailing her out. Simple as that. Switching gears a little bit, do want to talk about, because initiatives and proposed initiatives and ballot measures is something our organization is relentlessly involved in every campaign cycle. We want to make sure that we're not passing bad policy at the ballot, that we're not letting the radical left weaponize the ballot box. That's the worst thing that we could allow happen. Well, as part of that, though, is that the left does come and try to put measures on the ballot. They can pay to get signatures. And one measure they did drop a couple weeks ago was this one to propose a constitutional amendment that would radically change how the legislature and even how the state can manage our election process. It deals primarily with early voting. First read of that, it looked like bad news. I mean, what is your take on this measure? What does this thing do that the left is trying to put on the ballot for November to amend our Constitution with our election system?
Yeah, there's a couple provisions in this and this is, you're familiar with this, because typically when you want to stuff a ballot measure full of a bunch of different provisions, you're going to lead with some of the things that sound very popular. So if you're gonna hide a couple stinkers in there, you want to make it all kind of taste like vanilla ice cream on the outside, so that you can, market your initiative as the things that people, would like. And so they'll throw things in there on voter ID, because voter ID is popular with pretty much everybody along the political spectrum. But it really institutionalizes within our Constitution our current mail-in voting system. And some of those things are, what really gets under the burr of voters the most, which is, these late election results. So some of that is a function of how we do mail-in voting. And how
so the measure enshrines our entire existing mail-in voting system in the Constitution.
By right.
By right.
By right, as a fundamental right.
Could we change that in the future? Could we go down to the legislature and run a bill and say, okay, we want to fix something? Because, you may like early voting. There's a lot of debate about that. But how could anybody argue that the current system is perfect? As you mentioned, it's taken us weeks for us to get our results on election night. So is there a way to even do that, or does this measure basically prohibit any changes?
This would fundamentally upheave our election process. There would be nothing the legislature could do. And that's why I said at the beginning, you put these things that might sound good. Yes, a lot of people vote by mail. A lot of people like taking their early, their mail-in ballots if they forgot to put them in the mail in time and drop them off on election day at a polling place. Some people, people like that kind of choice in general, but they don't always think about all the process involved in running an election and how some of that can slow things down and create problems. And so they hid one provision in this ballot initiative that's probably the very most damaging, that voters they won't notice. They won't necessarily understand what it means, and that's they're changing the legal standard of review for anything that the legislature passes as far as election administration. And so even simple fixes, things that like having a drop-off cutoff date for dropping off that mail-in ballot, so it doesn't slow down the entire system. They could not do that. It would be what's called now reviewed under strict scrutiny. And so basically anything that they pass as far as trying to, create faster elections, more secure elections, just more accurate results, they could not make any tweaks, because then, the left could go challenge those things and basically say that, under strict scrutiny standard, those would fail, especially as they're enshrining all of these kind of process things and couching it in the initiative as a fundamental right of the voters. And so, it'd be game over. You couldn't make even modest tweaks to just improve the system.
For almost a decade now, Maricopa County has been a national laughingstock because we can't even come close to getting results on election night. It is taking weeks. This initiative passes. Can that ever be fixed?
No, it would never get fixed. You'd have to basically run another ballot measure to the people with a big giant uprooting this entire system through this ballot measure. Okay, that'd be the only way.
So that's the goal, which in some respects isn't that surprising, because the groups that are pushing this, and Katie Hobbs has made this perfectly clear because she's vetoed bills that would help us get results on election night, bills that have received bipartisan support, that there's a contingent on the left that they don't care. Like Katie Hobbs doesn't care that it's taking us weeks to get election results. And so ironically, they see this as a feature. They think it's a better feature to make sure we just keep the current system in place. We can speculate on those reasons why. I think they like the idea that they feel it's a system that they can kind of control related to mail-in voting. And whether or not we're sitting around at Thanksgiving wondering who's winning, whether or not all the votes are counted, I don't think the drafters of this care. They don't think they care.
we call her Chaos Katie, but a little bit of chaos built into these systems can be very advantageous. So you're right, it's a feature, not a bug.
All right, last topic. Affordability has been a big issue in Arizona nationally. I mean, it's a top issue that we have hammered on with lawmakers, policymakers. The cost of living, cost of everything. It's a real problem. I mean, it's been an issue, and how do we make sure we're actually putting forward good solutions to deal with these affordability issues? And so this year we introduced a bill to get at that. In fact, we think it's one of the best bills to tackle this problem, because one of the biggest offenders to creating things in Arizona to be in an unaffordable dilemma, just that made things just more costly in Arizona, has been local governments. Just endless tax and fee increases that we've been seeing all throughout the state. Sales tax increases, property tax increases, utility fee increases. Interestingly enough, local governments are swimming in cash. They never seem to have a revenue problem. That's never been an issue. They seem to have a spending problem, but don't seem to care. So while families are having to tighten their belts, local governments are just spending away and raising taxes while they do it. And so we proposed a bill to deal with that and try to implement a moratorium. And so what's going on with that bill? How's that moving along? What's happening? What does this moratorium look like? And why would it be a good idea for taxpayers?
Yeah, we have a bill as well as a referral. So, and for people who don't really know what that means, it just means the bill goes through the regular process, goes to Katie Hobbs, our governor, and she has an opportunity to sign it or veto. Or the legislature can refer it directly to the people. And so in our, infinite prophetic wisdom, we assume Katie Hobbs will oppose a moratorium on the city's raising to stop them from raising taxes, fees, and utility rates. And so
this doesn't make them have to actually cut anything.
Unfortunately,
it just says that they can't just stop the madness.
We'd love to go as far as to start, ratcheting back and putting caps on the fees and the rate hikes. That's, a little bit more difficult of a political lift. So yeah, it really just is a freeze. And it says, whatever your fee tax rate schedules are of this last year, that's what they'll be for the next 4 years. And, just
so
various, just a pause, just a breather, a little bit of a breather. And we know, we hear from people, we're a grassroots organization too. Obviously, we're feeling it. We're Gilbert residents, so our water bills have gone up over 100% in the last few years. We're seeing it directly in our
I got a story about that.
Uh-oh.
My dad lives in Gilbert, calls me up over the summer, thinks he has a water leak. He's like, he couldn't believe his water bill. He's like, my water bill is so large. He's like, what's going on? He's like, I think I have a water leak. I was like, Dad, you don't have a water leak. Like the town of Gilbert is just jacking up the water rates, and they've doubled them. And it's not going to stop. They're actually coming for more. And so my dad was freaking out. I can hear my mom chirping in the background because she was unhappy too. They just couldn't believe. They were astounded by how much their water bills had gone up in just less than a year. And it's not stopping. And they're not the only one. Multiple jurisdictions are doing this. And yet, when you look at these budgets, you look at the town of Gilbert and others, and they'll say, oh, well, we want the water fees to pay for themselves. What's missing from that equation is that they have an entire general fund that historically has always went in to help pay for all these different services, that they have decided, we just want to spend the money on other things because it's not a spending problem. These town budgets, many of them have just doubled over the last 10 years. They're not having to tighten their belts. Everybody else is. We're all having to pay for all of it, but local governments haven't tightened their belts. So explain to me, why isn't this getting unanimous support at the legislature? Why isn't everybody going,
I know, right?
Why aren't we giving just a pause to tax and fee increases?
That's a great question. And where the bill is in the process, just to zoom out a bit, it was actually on the floor yesterday to be amended. So that happens before a final vote of the bill. And it was introduced in the House. So it's still just trying to get out of the House. And it's made a couple tweaks to it just to even make it a little bit more palatable for people. So if you're
who are the people? I'm assuming.
Oh, good question.
I'm assuming all the cities obviously probably don't like this.
I think every single city in the state signed in against this thing. Oh yeah.
So what are the city council members coming down and sitting in the gallery, opposing this thing?
Oh, that's cute. No, in fact, I think most city councils probably, even though they represent the people, they don't take direct votes on this. So we just offload our policy positions for the city to intergovs and hired lobbyists. And so, yeah, we were sitting in the gallery.
Wait, so lobbyists. So there's a bunch of city lobbyists opposing this?
That your taxpayer dollars also pay for.
So taxpayers that are getting gouged with these tax and fee increases are simultaneously paying for lobbyists to go down to the Capitol and oppose efforts to try to provide tax relief.
To ensure they can keep doing it. Yeah,
is it possible for them to actually reduce the size of these tax and fee increases by getting rid of these paid lobbyists?
It's a great idea. There's another bill stirring up. Is it too late? Let's introduce that one. We're all for it. No, it was somewhat entertaining. It was my colleague and I in the gallery yesterday watching this unfold, and I think the whole gallery was filled with city lobbyists. So maybe the most hated measure moving through the body right now by the cities and towns. And then it was funny because the Democrats used it as an opportunity to run a bunch of amendments on the bill because they recognize how bad it looks for them to oppose a really great affordability measure, something that actually does something that people would support, voters would support, and would actually help on the affordability issue. And so they were running a whole bunch of unrelated subfloor amendments to try to gut the entire moratorium. So they recognize that it's really bad optics. They certainly would hate for this to land on Katie Hobbs' desk because there's no reality in which she doesn't veto that. And that's bad politics for them. I mean...
Yeah, everybody is irate about these tax and fee increases. The city of Tucson tried to do a half-cent sales tax increase last year. It failed 2-1. Many of these jurisdictions where they have to go to the voters and actually try to get voters to approve a tax increase, they fail miserably. So some of these towns said, oh, okay, well, we'll just stop doing that. We'll just approve it by a council vote and then hope people, get over this and we just don't have any opponents that run against us. I mean, it's just an endless machine, it seems like.
Oh, exactly right. And we know that we tried to make some changes to the bill to keep it moving. We'll see how it goes. We hope it can get voted next week. And if it can make it to the Senate side, we'll keep the conversation going. But
it's just critically important for policymakers, Republicans, anybody looking to run for office. They have to provide real solutions to this, to affordability. It can't just be lip service. And unfortunately, that's what we see a lot of. It's just lip service. And the reality is if you're going to provide actual solutions to affordability, it's going to run into resistance because there are going to be people out there that benefit from the unaffordability that's being created. So
yeah, it's particularly cringe to have lawmakers catering to the cities and towns when all they get is flack from them for lowering taxes from the state level. They want to say like, stay in your lane, state legislature. Well, forgetting that the legislature actually defines how narrow or broad the lane for city government is. And, they've been cutting taxes and cities have been raising them.
I always love that argument. They say, well, leave us alone, local control. And then, oh, by the way, they show up with their briefcase to pick up all their money that they get from the state because every city gets huge amounts of sums of money from shared revenues. So when people pay their income taxes, they pay their state sales taxes. Every jurisdiction gets a cut. They love that model because they don't actually have to be held accountable for it. They just get the money. They get to be Santa Claus.
Santa Claus, that's right.
They got to be local Santa Claus, take the money and go spend it.
Yeah.
While raising taxes, fees, water rates, and then claim that you can never put a freeze on anything. Right. So, Aimee, thank you so much for joining us for our inaugural State Room podcast here. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to watch our show today. Again, we're going to be doing this on a regular interval, probably once a week, talking about key issues that we're working on here in the state of Arizona, key political issues that we think we can provide some insight on, and hopefully keep things kind of fun and entertaining because a lot of these issues, oftentimes, even by design up at the legislature, they try to keep it as opaque as possible so that people don't understand. Our goal is to cut through the clutter, cut through the smoke, so that people understand what's really impacting us here in the state and how we can keep Arizona free. So thank you for joining us today here for the State Room.